don't have to make crazy finger stretches unless you have to. And then start being able to play patterns so that it doesn't matter what scale, what chord or what scale you're on, so that the pattern can keep going through the changes. And that's one of the great things about the real great jazz improvisers, is they have this sort of chord scale connection ability, so that it doesn't matter what chord they're on, they can make their line keep moving anyway. So, boy, I hope I can do it. Let's try and play on this progression. So I'm going to just start with you. So we'll go. Improvising through it. What I'd like to do is to just play one interval through it. I'm just going to take the interval of a sixth, of scale-wise sixths, and just try and play that through it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Six, but that's the sort of scale connection thing you want to have together. So when you're going through the changes, that you can decide what the sounds are going to be, so that you're not running from here to here. Say, oh, now it's Dorian, oh shit, and to go through it like that. So you got to watch that. It takes a long time, but there's no big mystery to it, no big secret. It just takes a lot of practice. Okay, now the second example here is not using the same scale. See, before I was either using Lydian or major scales on these major seventh chords. Now the second example is sort of the most frequently used chord progression in popular music. It's 2-5-1, and I guess that's really the most common cadence in music since, I don't know when, but it's real prevalent in all kinds of classical music, all kinds of pop music today. And it's just 2, 5, 1. A D minor, I'll play on D Dorian. Okay, now on G7-13, I will use the G7 symmetrical diminished, the half whole scale. Now on C major 7, I'll use either the Lydian or the Ionian. I'll give myself two choices here. Here I use both fourths, the augmented fourth and the natural fourth, which you can do. Okay, now I'm just going to blow on the progression. I'm going to try and just stay in the scales. So we'll go something like 1, 2, 3, 4. So that was really just running through just scale tones. And you can really make a lot of music out of that, and it takes a whole lot of time. But what happens after you start practicing these scales for a while is that you start to, maybe initially you won't really hear the tonality at first, before you start to practice them, but after you practice them for a certain amount of time, what happens is you do hear it in your mind, and you can actually sing, bum 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 bum. I can hear these lines in my head, I think that's actually not what I sang, but it's sort of close. So there's, boom bum 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 bum. So it's not just your fingers doing the walking, you got to hear this stuff. It's not doing you any good at all if you can't imagine the sound before you actually play it. If you're just moving, you'll say, I know this is going to work, and I know this is going to work. It's not really going to come out like music. Although, of course, everybody has some fast patterns that if they play it real fast, their vocal chops couldn't keep up with what their fingers can do. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about really, 99% of the things you play, you hear in your head. They're not just experimental, technical things. And a really good way to do that is to just study the modes, and to sit down and practice playing on C minor for 2 hours on the Dorian scale, if you can make 2 hours. If you can only make 10 minutes, that's good too. Just only practice as much as you can really get some work done. So we've gone over all these scales only to come up with this thing at the end here that says passing tones, and that any scale tone may be approached by a chromatic note a half step above or below. So what that means is you can play any note. So I mean that's sort of really true too, because like I said at the very beginning, the scales are not everything, and there are a whole lot of great jazz players out there, especially of the sort of older school, that don't really know the modes but use them all the time. But the fact of the matter is to play D minor, that when I'm going to play on this scale, it's not always going to just be D Dorian. That's because you can connect, and one of the basic things in music is connecting with passing tones. And I've sort of set up this little chart here that says you can connect any scale tone with a half step above, a half step below, or the double chromatic approach. So that gives us little patterns, like if I'm just going to maybe do a thing coming into every chord tone from a half step above or below. Play D minor, which sounds fine, but it has all these wrong notes in it, like this. But the fact is that note resolves. And I can do the same thing from below. So this is really away from the modal concept, and you were just thinking approach notes now. And then there's the double chromatic approach. And this really leads us to chromaticism, which is the ultimate goal of not having to stick with these scales, but to be able to fill in between the scale notes with chromatics. So now I'm just going to play on that progression, the example 2, the 2-5-1. And I'm not going to really think about the scales. I'm going to allow myself to just play what I feel, even though my real basis is this scalular playing. I won't make any bones about it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was chromatic right there. Chromatic. But it all depends on where you end, if it's tonal, right? So we've already broken the main rule of scales. So it just goes to show that there's no one way to do any of this stuff. Continuing on to page 6, we have pentatonic scales. And that all pentatonic means is 5-note scales. And it's probably one of the first things you learn is the blues scale, which is really a minor pentatonic scale. That's the second one here on the list. The major pentatonic scale is... Then there's something I call the dominant pentatonic. Now these little 5-note scales are really part of the other modes. In other words, each one of these 5 notes, you can find them in another 7 or 8-note mode. So this is C major pentatonic. That's a major pentatonic started from the chord root. Okay, the minor pentatonic is starting from the 6th of the key we're in. So that would be starting from A over C. No, C major. Which is actually the same exact scale as C major pentatonic. Now let's take a major pentatonic started from the 2nd. This is nice. It gives you augment 11. Or we can make that a dominant pentatonic. Okay? Or we can take a minor pentatonic and start it from the 7th. Okay, now for minor 7th chords, we can play a minor pentatonic started from the root of the chord we're playing on. So C minor 7 would be a C minor pentatonic. Now we can take a minor pentatonic from the 5th, a 5th away from the chord we're playing on.